Welcome back, friends, to the Traveller's Guide to Natar. You meet me today as we step off from our spaceship for the first time onto Natar. We find ourselves taking in the fresh air at Talcit Aerodrome at dusk. The place is effectively a glorified airport terminal out in the suburbs. Dozens of different terminal buildings dot the concrete-covered landscape here, connected by buses that rush in a frenzy between the landing and departing ships. I call this air fresh, but honestly it feels like the air back in the spaceship was healthier. I can't help but feel like I stand out like a sore thumb here. Everyone else is rushing about. There is scarcely an idle person here at the spaceport. It seems that the logistical hub for the city isn't a place for idleness. Brushing past running stevedores and panicked groups of tourists late for their ship, I make my way to the land transport centre and find a bus into town. As sure as I am that Talcit Terminal, amongst its noise and vehicles, has some interesting places, I don't wish to linger here more than I have to. The guide bus I board sets off into the increasingly dark countryside on course for Talcit. I notice that, for a suburb, the fringe of the city has remarkably few detached houses. Instead, we are immediately hit by row after row of terraced building, industrial estates, warehouses, and construction sites. In fact, there's so much construction in view that it's like the entire outside of the city is scaffolded. I am informed that the city is growing at such an unprecedented rate from migration and development that not only does it engulf everything in its wake, but nothing less congested really has time to be constructed on its fringes. This is a city with an insatiable appetite. It grows every day and has been for the past 2 decades, and to understand why I must lend you a history lesson. Talcit started out as a town founded by the ancient Tanyards, a Telerian culture that now forms a minority group in the modern-day Kalethian Republic. Back then, Talcit was called Tonio upon the River, named after its useful river connection out to sea. After several centuries, Tonio was conquered by the nearby city-state of Pericet, which belonged to the Kaleth culture. Pericet soon after proclaimed the Kalethian Empire, and Tonio, renamed Talcit, was made its new capital after the old Tanyardic locals were enslaved and exiled. In the century that followed, Kalethia became a mighty nation, not only on its continent, the continent of Arkland, but also the entire world once it mastered the art of the sailing ship. The Kalethians viewed themselves as the hub of culture and civilization for the whole world. They skirmished with their neighbours, occupied vast tracts of tribal lands abroad, and constructed great buildings at the heart of its capital. The Kalethian Empire ended when more liberal nobles and burghers alongside a newborn industrialist class orchestrated a revolution against the old monarchy and entrenched aristocracies. However, its colonial empire, its wealth and its status as the de facto centre of the world stuck, and in a new age of free trade and industrialisation, the country grew ever faster. In the 8th Great War, the last Great War ever fought between the great powers of Natar, Kalethia's supremacy was only exemplified. Since then, the establishment of the Associated States of Natar saw Kalethia become the centrepiece in all-world politics. People and groups from the administrators of the ASN to the lowest of separatist movements sought Kalethia first in all things. But for all the power and wealth and prestige that Kalethia has accrued for its capital over the past 2 millennia, only a sixth of this modern city is over 3 decades old. The majority of this vast urban sprawl was in fact built only recently. The cause for such rapid growth can be firmly squared on one man, a Telerian who was neither a leader of Kalethia or even a citizen of it. Mose Tetlerson, a man who changed the face of the planet, once much like any other unaligned, and turned it into a potential rival to the economic heart of the galaxy, Lost Star. But that's enough about history. We'll talk more about it and Mose Tetlerson at another time. The point is, Talcit is a world of juxtaposition. On one hand, here resides the pre-space world, the great landmarks of the old quarter and the centres of power at the city core. On the other hand, here you can find the flash, gleaming human skyscrapers of the business circle, the swanky clubs and sleazy casinos of the gamblers' circle, and the darker streets and scenes of the failures' circle. Old and new, that is Talcit, and there's much to show of both. But let us start simple. Let us explore a bit of the business circle. It is, after all, where I find my hotel for the night, and so exploring this place is simply a case of walking through the streets en route to my destination. The business circle finds itself generally midway into the city, which makes it rather strange as, due to the typical process of urban growth, skyscrapers and towers will naturally find themselves towards the core of the city. Instead, here in Talcit, they form a wall of sorts, blocking the insalubrious residential and industrial areas of the outer city from the touristy and affable inner. Apparently, this has made Talcit and the business circle a beloved visual for photographers to visualize social issues. Wealth and well-being here looks almost physically divided from poverty and roughness, and the barrier that separates the two is the capitalistic business world. But that's enough about the more political connotations of this neighbourhood. Let's discuss its appearances. Stepping from the bus, I expected to be met largely by a ghost town. In most typical human cities, the financial sectors become more or less dead in the night. Its workers will commute home, its offices will shut down for the night, and the only illumination will come from streetlights and a few tower lobbies occupied by night guards. However, here, the place is alive as ever. People walk to and fro on the pavements, traffic fills the streets, and lighting from the street lamps is accompanied by the warm lights of the numerous layers of each glass business tower that lines every road here. I refer to the lighting as warm, as if it's cosy and relaxing here, because it is. You see, the Talirians on Natar are a nocturnal people. Generally speaking, they don't need much light at all, but sharing a world now with humans, Carnathians, Aurelians, Hochlanders, and hundreds of other species, they now compromise with lights that are either typically dim or don't put strain on the Talirian eye. Lighting you'll find on Natar for this reason will usually lack blue. Walking for a little more than half an hour, I must admit that as much as I like the activity, there isn't much for the tourist here in the business sector. The characters here are typically the professional sort, clad in suits of grey with laptop bags. They leave and enter these tall towers emblazoned with a variety of galactic brands. Typically they're on their phones carrying a takeout coffee or something else to multitask with. I suppose it's only natural to find the efficiently timed types in the corporate sector. On the road flow a variety of black, sleek taxis. They're joined by the more common tuk-tuks. Not the traditional sort, mind you, but one not even possessing a driver's seat. I find information online about this sort of thing. Apparently, these are like a sort of widely accessible chauffeur or taxi that you can arrange and hire for a year, and so are very convenient for the sort who have to work typical jobs but don't care much for mass transport. They operate like a sort of custom bus for people, picking individuals up or small groups up from their house and then transporting them from A to B and then moving on to their next appointment. Their prices only seem to be a little more expensive than using a personal car, covering the costs of fuel with only a little bit on top. They avoid fees for a driver, the focus of having to drive for yourself, the cost of buying your own car, the health risks of public transport, or the fees for owning your own vehicle in the city. But that's enough about the Talirian approaches to transportation. As I get closer to my destination, it hoves into sight. The Spire. Like an upright lance, it pierces into the night sky with an exterior of pure white. The Spire is a tower shaped much like a needle, getting thin as it closes in on the top, but at the very height it juts out once again. Some say it looks like a disc balancing perfectly on top of a pin, but in truth, what we're seeing is a trick. The reality is that the Spire, at least at the top, is accompanied by girders and beams, each fitted with cloaking technology used by many foreign countries for their military, which are disguised to give the illusion that the top disc rests upon a sharp tip and nothing else. Most of the building is actually either inaccessible or unusable for anything beyond storage. It has too few windows or too few space, but for the top layer, seemingly teetering over the city, a hotel resides. Accessing the top of this landmark of Talcit isn't easy, both physically or financially. In order to get up there, I have to reach a nearby smaller construction which hosts a helicopter that looks like it ought to be reserved for billionaires. In truth, I suspect that is less of a jest and more of a reality, because booking a room up on the Spire's disk costs more than I, or the company I work for, can afford. Instead, we, the proles, are confined to an unassuming hotel tower building that sits beside it. Heading to my room, I feel like perhaps I have robbed you, dear explorer, of an experience. But I can assure you, before we are done with Talcit, we will get our view from atop the Spire. Once again, I must thank you, dear friends, for following me on my journey as we begin our exploration of Natar. But for now, I say goodbye. It is time for me to take stock and prepare for a night outing, because next time you'll join me as we explore the jazzier side of Talcit, the Gambling Quarter, known to be the birthplace of Natar's reputation for vice, hedonism, and debauchery. Until next time, farewell.